House Democrats voted to impeach the president this week. What happens next? And will there be a conviction? House Minority Leader Congressman Kevin McCarthy will tell us exclusively. Pope Francis abolishes the so-called pontifical secret to make the church more transparent in sex abuse investigations. Here with analysis and a review of the big stories of the year is the Papal Posse, Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray. And Christmas is upon us, so is an avalanche of holiday entertainment. Is there anything worth watching? Monica FITZGIBBONS of Aim Higher Recordings has some suggestions. And the former Anglican chaplain to the Queen of England is about to become a Catholic. What brought him to the church? Gavin Ashenden shares his story. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. A great show for you tonight. Representative Kevin McCarthy, Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, Monica FITZGIBBONS, Gavin Ashenden, and my pick for the World Over Person of the Year. It's all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. Let's get right to it. The U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach President Donald J. Trump this week, making him the third president in U.S. history to be formally impeached. The House voted on party lines to approve 2 articles of impeachment against the president, the first for abuse of power, the second for obstructing Congress. Here to talk about what transpired in Thursday's historic vote and where the process goes from here is House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Thank you for being here. I know it's been a busy day for you, busy week. After years of urging impeachment, once the deed was done, Speaker Pelosi held a press conference last night, and she made this astounding statement regarding forwarding the articles of impeachment to the Senate. Watch.
I said we're not sending it tonight because it's difficult to determine who the managers would be until we see the arena in which we will be participating.
This is unprecedented, Minority Leader. What is happening here? Is there a legal precedent and grounds for doing this, withholding the articles after they've been passed by the whole House?
She has none. Now, you got to pass the second one to pass the managers. And once the managers are passed, then she could send both. But she's talking about holding the complete thing, which is unconstitutional. To me, she's acknowledging how weak her case is. It's almost an embarrassment. Then you have Schumer over there trying to ask for witnesses because he knows how weak the case was over in the House.
Do you see this as an obstruction of Congress, which is one of the charges, articles of impeachment, that
Jonathan Turley was correct. A Democrat, Jonathan Turley, constitutional scholar, he said the only abuse is how fast they are moving this and what they're doing. It's the Democrats who are actually abusing of Congress.
So there's no legal requirement that she appoint House managers and pass this out of the House.
I believe it's constitutional, no, that she would eventually have to send it. She could not hold it the whole time because it is in the Constitution. When you impeach, and then the Senate is the jury. Yeah, you've got to have the trial. The only thing that she could be thinking of, here I accused him of something, and a trial lets him prove his freedom, I'm not going to let him prove it.
Well, and she said she was offended because Majority Leader McConnell said, I'm not an impartial juror. I'm a member of Congress, and I already don't believe this case at all. She said he's prejudging the trial, and therefore she feels it's politically tainted and partisan to send it over there.
What's so outrageous, she's concerned about process. She would not give a fair process here. But think about this. The chairman of the committee that did impeachment, Nadler, he campaigned for that chairmanship on the basis that he'd be the best for impeachment. She said they worked on this for 2.5 years, long before any phone call. I mean, they have planned this, gauged the system, changed the system, and now they're frustrated because they have a very weak case.
I want to show this to you. This is Speaker Pelosi at a press conference when she was naturally asked about withholding these articles of impeachment from the Senate. Watch.
Anybody want to talk about the SALT tax that we're passing today, important issues that relate to the economic vitality of our communities? Any other questions? Because I'm not going to answer any more questions on this.
How can she not answer questions on this? She's been talking about this for 3 years. They've been beating this drum, and we heard about it during the Mueller investigation. Then it was Ukraine. How can she not talk about it?
Can you picture this? She just impeached the President of the United States last night. She's the Speaker of the House that has this weekly press conference. I go after. She walks into that and says, I won't take any questions on impeachment. It's like she's raising the white flag. She knows how bad it is. You know what else happened in this process? Today, one of her own members switched parties. Tell me whether you think she was smart about doing impeachment or not. The poll numbers are down. Her conference is smaller, and we're stronger.
I noticed that. The Gallup poll out on Wednesday, the president has a 45% approval rating. That's up 6 points since the impeachment inquiry began. Did the Democrats make a mistake in bringing this so quickly?
They made a big mistake, but they also did damage to our country. I mean, this is what Alexander Hamilton wrote about. This is what he was fearful in the Federalist Papers, that some party would use the animosity to not look at what is right and what is wrong. That's exactly what they did. They were blinded.
Now, Speaker Pelosi insisted, I was there the other day when she said this is a solemn and prayerful occasion. But video has emerged of Congresswoman Rashid Tlaib on her way to vote for impeachment. Watch this.
Hey everyone, I am on my way to the United States House floor to impeach President Trump on behalf of my incredible district, 13 districts strong. Let's do this.
What did you see around the edges of this? Was it solemn and prayerful?
Not at all. But also, on her very first day when she was sworn into Congress, you know what she said that night? That she was going to impeach the mother.
Yeah.
That is what she said. And when I mentioned that on the floor, that they had planned this from the very first day.
Right.
Even Raskin, who represented the Democrats in the Rules Committee about the articles,
Right.
he talked about impeaching the president at a rally 2 days before the president was inaugurated. It's what they planned.
When you mentioned this during your final wrap-up speech last night, Congresswoman Omar said, shut up.
She did
Stop
it twice.
It. Stop it.
She didn't want to hear the truth. I just said, those are not my words, those were hers. Wow. You know, I started the whole thing with, I had to warn the speaker, I'm going to say something that's really going to upset my Democrat colleagues. Donald J. Trump is president of the United States. He's president today, he's president tomorrow, and he'll be president after this impeachment.
This is Senator Mitch McConnell on the next step of impeachment, the Senate trial, and then I want your reaction.
Speaker Pelosi suggested that House Democrats may be too afraid to even transmit their shoddy work product to the Senate. Mr. President, it looks like the prosecutors are getting cold feet in front of the entire country and second-guessing whether they even want to go to trial.
What do you expect to see from the Senate? What happens next, and how soon do you think it'll happen?
Well, I would think it won't happen until the first of the year. And then it's pretty clear what has to happen. The Chief Justice comes in, seats at the top, senators have to be in their chairs, can't have their phones, they have to listen, just like a jury. But what's interesting to me is that Nancy Pelosi is trying to influence. She's fearful of what witnesses they can call. They want to game the system of what we can do. We have due process in here. And it's pretty much what Mitch McConnell said. It seems like they're afraid of actually having sunlight put on this case.
Do you support an extended trial with witnesses from both sides?
You know what? If they want to call a witness, that's fine, but I don't think there's much there. I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand. Take a week or two and see. But we have been through so much in the House. It's so interesting that all those witnesses that only the Democrats could choose, not one of them can find something to impeach this president on.
The trade deal that the president has labored years to renegotiate. Bob Lighthizer, who we both know, dug in back and forth. I mean, people thought this would never happen. It happened. You all passed it today. Nancy Pelosi says this is a Democratic achievement. She got enforcement in there. You would say what?
I would say she talked about 1% of the entire bill for the president to even get this done. And remember, Mexico's our #1 trader, Canada's #2, and we are trying to have a deal with China. Had she pulled this bill up anytime during the year, we would have been stronger in our negotiations. The only reason this bill came to the floor is because she impeached the president last night. She could not end on this. And it really, she got the moderates to vote for impeachment because she'd bring USMCA up.
It's an amazing achievement, though. And I remember early on people said Donald Trump was out of his mind to renegotiate with Canada. The Canadians said, we're not doing a deal with you. So did Mexico. The fact that he got that through, that is extraordinary. And I mean, I've read chunks of it. I've read some of the summary. Seems a good deal for the American worker.
It's a great deal. But the most important thing, you were right. This is the art of the deal. This is what the president talked about he'd be able to accomplish if he was president. I think business schools will study how he negotiated this because it's almost impossible to do, and he did it.
Now, there is something we need to talk about. The other day, you all passed this omnibus bill,
Yes.
$1.4 billion, trillion in spending.
I wish it was just a bit.
I wish it were too. I want to say billion because I feel my tax dollars leaching out and going to that place. $738 billion for defense. That's a $22 billion increase above the spending caps that you all voted to put in and then blew through last time. Other thing, a 7-year reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, which the president opposes utterly. He only got $1.3 billion for the $8 billion he wanted for the wall. Is this a good deal? And how long can we continue borrowing against our children's future?
You know, the real fear I have that every great society collapses when they overextend themselves.
Yeah.
And the real challenge here is I'm concerned about this spending, but this is not the big makeup of the spending. This is discretionary. And the interesting part, when the Republicans had the majority, when Nancy Pelosi had to hand that gavel to John Boehner, and I had to hand it back to her now, do you realize during that whole time we actually spend less on discretionary? Republicans didn't increase it, didn't put a COLA, actually spent less discretionary. Nancy Pelosi comes in the speaker, already blows it. Makes the spending go higher. That's the challenge this poor president has. He needs a Congress that has a majority in there of Republicans that can help him. This is the challenge that we're going for. Now, rebuilding our military is smart because what happened was Obama pretty much decimated it. We had to rebuild planes and others. That's making the country safer, also making the world safer. That's a smart move. But there are a few good things in here. When you talk about the pro-life, all those riders we were able to win when we were in the majority, we kept them.
But Planned Parenthood is funded again in this bill.
And one element of it where they go from outside. But we kept all the elements of what they were trying to do with this Democrat majority. So we were able to change something.
Before I let you go, you only need 18 seats to take the gavel.
Yesterday
yourself.
it was 19, today's 18.
Oh, 18 today. So you're moving in your direction.
Yes.
How close do you think you'll get? Do you think you get the gavel back?
I believe we get the gavel back. There are 30 Democrats sitting in seats that Trump carried. But there are 55 seats we could actually play in. If you look at the polling today, you look at the recruits of what we've been able to do. We have more women Republican running today than ever in the history. We have 120 more candidates filed today than we did at 2010 at this time when we beat 63 Democrats. I'm telling you, this is the moment in time, and we have more intensity on our side based upon what the Democrats have done. And what are they going to run for re-election on? That they've offered more subpoenas than laws? I don't think that works.
Leader McCarthy, thank you for your time.
Thank you
for coming, and we'll see you in the new year.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now on to some church news. Pope Francis abolished the pontifical secret in an effort to make the church more transparent when investigating cases of sexual abuse. Now this essentially gives civil authorities access to documents and testimony in these particular cases that were previously sealed. Will this move achieve the transparency Pope Francis desires? And is it fair to victims and the accused? Here with analysis, plus a look back on the big stories of 2019 and my choice for the World Over Person of the Year. I'm joined by the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of TheCatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, here with me in Washington, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD MURRAY, who joins us from Manhattan. Gentlemen, glad we can take one final ride before we move into 2020. I want to start with the laicization of Theodore McCarrick, which was the big story to come out of the Vatican in early 2019. 5 days before the start of the Sex Abuse Summit in February, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis had expelled Theodore McCarrick from the priesthood after the church found him guilty of sexually abusing minors and adult seminarians over decades. The Vatican has yet to release a report on the findings of the McCarrick investigation. Now, several American bishops met with Pope Francis this week and over the last few months. They say to expect a report sometime at the beginning of the next year. Do you, Father Jerry, expect any new information or surprises to be revealed about McCarrick?
Raymond, I think there will be surprises. Certainly there'll be new information because this study is based on the archives, meaning the files, the documents that they have on file in the different Vatican departments. So depending on what documents are revealed, I think we're going to learn things that we did not know. We'll also have an opportunity to compare what is released by the Vatican with what we already know from the assertions by Archbishop Vigano, and then also the revelations by Father Boniface Ramsey and Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, all of whom knew McCarrick, had dealings with him, and then brought to the fore that, in fact, McCarrick's situation had been made known to Rome years before.
Now, Bob, there is a tension here. I mean, there are high stakes involved in this kind of report. Do you think we're going to learn the individuals that propelled McCarrick and kept him in power for so long?
Well, I'm hopeful that Father Murray is hopeful. When he's hopeful, it makes me even more optimistic than I might normally be.
Well, you're both more optimistic than I am then. Go ahead.
But I'm doubtful about that. I think we're going to see a lot of emphasis on what happened in the past that enabled McCarrick to pass through this course of honors where he just went from being a bishop and then up and up and up to become Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, and then the most influential prelate, I think, in the United States, we could say at a certain point. I think what a lot of people are more interested in knowing right now, I mean, that is all very interesting and needs to be brought out because we need to deal with that sort of thing and make sure it doesn't happen again. But I think what a lot of people would like to know, too, is why McCarrick came back from the dead, so to speak, in about 2013. I mean, it's simply the case that Archbishop Vigano himself broke the seal of the pontifical secret because he said the pontifical secret was not intended to hide crimes, that he felt it was necessary for him to speak out because there were crimes being concealed under this sort of ruling. So I'm quite skeptical that we're going to see things that are relevant to the most recent difficulties. Why was McCarrick going to China? What was he involved with there? Why was he seemingly rehabilitated in some fashion or other?
And still had access to a lot of money.
Yeah.
He was trying to pick the pockets of the Papal Foundation and other places, which, let's face it, funded his propulsion up the ladder in Rome and kept him in power and kept him in good stead in the halls of power.
As we've seen with other figures around the Holy Father who have had abuse questions raised, and as we've seen in some of the financial scandals, as you start to get close to people who are actually in power right now in Rome, it seems you hit a brick wall.
Yeah. The Sex Abuse Summit was held in Rome from February 21st to the 24th of this year. It was to look at the protection of minors and vulnerable adults, but it became clear early on that this meeting was not going to include the protection of vulnerable adults and therefore did not cover the sexual abuse of seminarians. Now, this is Archbishop Scicluna and Cardinal Cupich on that focus.
The prudence that you need in confronting sexual abuse of minors will also serve you in confronting other types of misconduct.
Those other issues of misbehavior on the part of clerics with vulnerable adults or other adults are topics that need addressing. But we are focusing in these days on those who have so little voice. Young people, minors, don't have a voice, and they are kept in silence.
So the translation is they didn't hear about abuse of vulnerable adults. How big an omission was this at this summit to ignore the predation on seminarians and young men, Father Jerry?
Well, it certainly is a topic that should be studied at the Vatican. Whether to do it at that moment was the right thing, that's debatable. But I will point out that in the new law that Pope Francis issued in May of this year, Vos Estis, they do talk about crimes committed by ecclesiastics against vulnerable adults, and that would include seminarians. In addition, that law dealt with the cover-up of ecclesiastical crimes involving sex abuse by religious superiors, meaning bishops and then heads of religious orders. So that was a great step in progress in actually putting into precise terminology the ecclesiastical crime of covering up. And they also made it easier to report to Vatican authorities, either to the nuncio or directly to the Roman congregation, when suspicion is present that a superior, such as a bishop, is covering something up. So there is progress that has been made since that meeting in the Vatican, but I would say at the time there was a lot of dissatisfaction because there were a lot of generalities, but there were actually, it wasn't clear where it was going at that point.
Now, Father Jerry, you wrote a piece on those new norms, and you noted that it doesn't establish clear penalties for abusers and bishops complicit in these cover-ups, What can the American bishops do about that?
Well, this is the law develops, by the practice of the Roman Curia, so how they deal with the penalties. Now, one of the things that we have is the case of Buffalo, where the bishop there, Bishop Malone, was accused of covering up sex abuse that was going on in his diocese. And instead of invoking vos estis, this new law, which required an examination of the case according to these new norms, the Pope sent an apostolic visitator, that was Bishop DiMarzio of Brooklyn, and within a few weeks of the completion of that visit, Bishop Malone's retirement was accepted. So it was a little bit strange, and that was noted by commentators, that a case that clearly fit in with the new law was instead handled in an alternate manner. Let's see, as the next complaint comes forward, we already know that there's a complaint out in Minnesota that's been lodged with the Holy See regarding another bishop. Let's see how that plays out. But I'm encouraged that there is progress in addressing not simply the horrible crime of sex abuse by priests, but also the enabling crime of protecting or covering up those by bishops and religious superiors.
Bob, the Pope is getting a lot of good press this week because of eliminating this pontifical secret, which was created by Pope Benedict, if I'm not incorrect, and when it deals with cases of sexual abuse. My question is, when Vatican officials say this is a sign of transparency and cooperation with civil authorities, is it in practice?
Well, it's a step forward insofar as it means you can't use this as an excuse any longer not to turn over documents or whatever. But there still is the case, as many people have pointed out, that there still is going to be the question of responsibility, when these things are actually going to be reported somewhere. And I don't handle these cases. I mean, obviously, Father Murray has. There still is going to be a question of discretion, because we've all seen cases in which people have been wrongly accused. Someone is trying to get revenge on a priest or a bishop that they don't like. There needs to be also the discretion to protect people who are innocent from simply wild charges. But this is a step forward. And I have to say that I was in Rome when the February summit took place, and that that event when Cardinal Supich and Archbishop Scicluna were speaking, people were laughing in the room because they were being put on the spot, and there's this kind of lawyerly approach. Well, we're only doing the most vulnerable right now. And then a woman reporter said to Scicluna, Cardinal McCarrick stood in this very room and told us 10 years ago that we were going to get to the bottom of this. And you're telling us that this is going to be delayed further. So, look, it's a step forward, but you still get the sense that there's some foot dragging here, that they don't really want to get to some of the more sensitive cases that might be out there. But we'll see as this develops how much that's
well, and as we've said on this show repeatedly, there are also some very high-profile cases of people working at the Vatican, very close to the upper echelons of power there, who have, for whatever reason, been shielded, protected, and they somehow don't get the full accounting, and we don't get justice in those situations. But maybe this is moving closer. We'll see. Pope Francis appointed a fellow Jesuit, Father Juan Antonio Guerrero Alves, to be the Vatican's finance minister. Now, he's filling that crucial position left vacant for more than 2 years by Cardinal George Pell when he left Rome to stand trial on his sex abuse charges in his native Australia. Father Jerry, your thoughts on the choice and timing of this appointment, a Jesuit with no extensive financial experience, going in and overseeing what, is a nightmare, which we'll get to in a moment.
Well, he's got a big challenge, and I don't know the man, and I'm sure he, is a man who's obviously shown that he has accomplishments that drew his name to the Pope's attention. I can say this, to go from a cardinal with international stature, Pell, to a relatively unknown priest, that's not exactly a confidence-building move by comparison in the secular world if you had, the head of corporate finance at a big corporation being replaced by, in essence, a branch manager who had limited exposure to the overall operations. So, the Pope has his reasons, and I don't know this man and his qualifications aside from reading his resume in the newspapers. So I wish him well, but the way things work in the Vatican often is cardinals only pick up the phone when there's a problem if it comes from another cardinal. So let's see if this man can assert himself in this situation.
Now, Bob, this comes in the wake of a string of financial scandals this past year. A $110 million Vatican loan on this speculative London property, a $50 million loan to bail out an Italian hospital, and then there was the Peters Pence story that broke late this year that only 10% of the $55 million raised, and at least in the advertising of this campaign, it's always to help the poor. Only 10% of that money actually goes to the poor. Where do we go from here, and why should people feel confident in giving to the church?
Well, I don't think they should feel confident. I think they should be very careful where they put their money. I know I myself have, my wife and I have made certain decisions about where we give.
Recalibrated your giving.
Recalibrated our giving. Look, one of the things we know for sure, that just as in the cases of sexual abuse, when they rise to the level of various figures inside the Vatican, some very close to the Holy Father, some personal friends. Every time somebody gets close, or seems to be getting close, to these financial problems, which seem eminently solvable. This poor Jesuit who's being brought in does seem to have had some experience running some Jesuit province in Spain or something, but not at this level. I mean, what you need at this level, as Father rightly says, is not only a cardinal who can navigate the prelates within the Vatican. You need serious financial knowledge. This is not rocket science. It's very simple to set up an organization. In fact, it seems to me that will monitor investments, that will not allow the Vatican to invest in a movie about Elton John and his gay lifestyle and his anti-Christian points of view. I mean, these are very simple steps that can be put in place if there's a will to do it.
But it's not so simple in this ecosystem. And as you know, and Father Jerry, you're talking about layers upon layers, decades of practices that when you bring a guy like Pell, and let's be honest, part of the reason George Pell was targeted and hated by the old guard in the Vatican is because he was turning up those stones and exposing people who had these honey, little honey pots all over the place where they were picking and using money for their own lifestyles and their own choices. This is a problem. And in a year when we've seen the Vatican regulator resign, because he was so outraged. The head of the Vatican Bank walked out the door because they claim he was spying on other people. He was probably trying to get to the bottom of this, too. How do you clean this up, Father Jerry? How does a novice Jesuit walk in the door and clean up this kind of decades-long corruption, probably centuries corruption?
Well, when you have financial scandals in corporate America or in government, the only way that you restore confidence is by coming clean with a full story. And that often happens in courts because people get sued and, Enron and all these other type cases that we know of. I think the Vatican has to, modernize its approach in a way that would require lay participation at the level of investment review committees and with clear public standards about where money will be invested. There should be a vetting process for any Vatican money manager, that he have no known criminal associations, that he not be involved in institutions which themselves have been either criminally investigated or, in fact, just suspended because of bad dealings. The whole thing here gets down to accountability in the sight of those who are providing the funds, and that is the laity of the Catholic Church. It's amazing, for instance, when you read these stories, that investments are made with money managers and in projects that are particularly known to certain ecclesiastics, but otherwise have no profile at all in world economic, the world economy. As somebody wrote in one commentary, when you're investing money, what about J.P. Morgan? Why aren't major banks who have, all kinds of level of government scrutiny in the United States or elsewhere. Why aren't they the ones managing the money? Now, for all we know, most of the money could be with a place like that. But we really need accountability, and the Vatican is a sovereign state, but the sovereignty of the state is to be at the service of the mission. The mission of the church is not served by financial dealings that are obviously dishonest or that involve corrupt people who are friends with those who hired them.
Right.
So that has to be really cleaned up fast.
Well, and Bob, the exposure of those individuals is critical here because they don't want to be exposed. So they stop the internal audit. When you get Price Waterhouse coming in, suddenly up through the chain of the State Department to the Holy Father, they say, we're not doing that Price Waterhouse audit anymore. Why not? And isn't that why we're here? Very quickly, we only have 10 minutes.
Look, a friend of mine, Ettore Gozzi Tedeschi, is a former president of the Vatican Bank. And he and I were having lunch one time in Rome a couple of years ago after he'd been dismissed from his post for no cause that we can identify. And he said to me, Father said, you have to identify the different properties and whatnot. Well, he said to me, the Vatican does not know even what it owns. It has some idea of what it owns. And I said, like what? And he said, well, like the building we're sitting in right now in this restaurant, I think is owned by the Vatican. I said, you think it's owned? He said, yes, no one really has an inventory of this sort of thing. I mean, look, if you're even going to get serious about saying, let alone doing, that you're going to do a financial cleanup, you've got to look outside. I don't think it's going to ever be cleaned up from the inside, because we see every time somebody gets close to probably the malefactors, that person ends up off the scene.
Yep. Yeah. And George Pell probably got closest to reform here, true reform. The Vatican-China deal, which was signed in September of 2018, has been discussed many times this year as religious freedom has continued to deteriorate in China. The Catholics of that country are suffering more than they ever were before the deal was signed. Churches continue to be demolished, priests and laity are constantly threatened, and bishops are now on the run. Father Jerry, why are we not hearing anything from the Vatican? No condemnation for what's happening to bishops, to priests, to laity, and they seem to have no objection or even problem with the religious and human rights offenses we're seeing reported every day in the media.
Well, this is an area of grave concern to me and to many, many people, because when certain governments engage in practices to regulate immigration, illegal immigration into their countries, the Vatican is swift and condemnatory. When Chinese communist government officials tear down churches, issue laws prohibiting religious education for children, coerce priests into joining the Patriotic Association, when all of those things happen, the Vatican, as you say, is quiet. Cardinal Zen, who is the retired Cardinal of Hong Kong, has used very strong language. And I endorse him because I think he's telling the truth. He says the Chinese Catholics feel betrayed. And I scratch my head and I say, what is going on here? Well, we don't really know everything, because the Vatican entered into a deal with the Chinese Communist government without ever publishing the deal. We don't have any idea of what's in that deal. The Vatican should basically say to us, this is what we agreed to, and then defend it. Instead, they simply say, we agreed to something and now we're going to take action. I mean, the Vatican required bishops who were, in fact, in communion with Rome previously to cede their place to bishops who were part of this dissident, really schismatic organization.
Run by
bishops
the government.
Who had been ordained. Yeah, bishops ordained without papal mandate and therefore automatically excommunicated. They were regularized overnight. This isn't right. Let's just say the real truth here. It seems that there's a desire to be cozy with the communists in order to get goodwill from them, and hopefully that'll produce some kind of public manifestation of friendship with the Vatican. It seems that that's more important than actually defending the rights of the church. For instance, why does the Chinese government have a say in who becomes a Catholic bishop? Can you imagine if Donald Trump sent a note to the Vatican saying, I want to name the next Archbishop of Philadelphia. Can I have some rights over that? The Vatican would laugh at him. Well, they should have laughed at the communists for the same thing.
Yeah. Pelosi would have impeached him again. I want to move on to this. I've got to. I'm almost out of time. The Synod on the Amazon took place in October. This, of course, was a huge story. You both were there. We covered this extensively. They recommended and proposed ordaining married men and requested a female diaconate. Now, long-term, Bob, what is the impact of this synod substantively?
Well, it's very strange that this problem that exists in the Amazon, that could have been dealt with in the Amazon, and it could have been dealt with a synod in the Amazon, was actually brought to Rome, as was Pachamama, by the way, along the way, and made into what? An international event, so that people could use this admittedly difficult situation in the Amazon for what? I think clearly to reshape the universal church, because if deaconesses are going to be allowed, and if married priests are going to be allowed in the jungles of the Amazon, well, why not in other places where there's a shortage of clergy and of other church workers? Why not in Germany, where there are not in many other ordinations or vocations? So I think that it's very clear that this was not intended solely to focus on one region in the church, but to begin a paradigm. And several of the bishops involved actually said it, that this is going to become a paradigm for the universal church.
We'll see. Well, while we're talking about the Amazon Synod, I want you all to react to this. I'd like to name the world over Person of the Year. Now, in this case, it's not exactly a person, but this is an individual, an entity that certainly made a splash this year and had an enormous impact on the church, overshadowed this entire synod, and I'm talking, of course, about Pachamama, those wooden idols that were venerated at the Amazon Synod. They became a symbol of the synod and set off headlines around the world. Let's hope she doesn't make it into the running next year. Father Jerry, your reaction to this whole Pachamama scandal. You had that Austrian young man who grabbed it and tossed it into the Tiber. The Pope later apologized for that. Does that have any long-term impact? It certainly scandalized a lot of Catholics around the world.
Well, the visual image that most people have of the synod began in the Vatican Gardens even before the synod opened, where they had a ceremony of a tree planting, and the Pachamama statue was on the lawn there, and people formed a circle and then bowed in prostration before this statue. Then later on, the statue was carried into St. Peter's. The statue was put into the Synod Hall. It was also put into a church on the street leading up to the Vatican. In other words, an idol became the focus of attention for many people at this synod, and this was done with the approval of the Catholic Church authorities. That young man who threw it into the water had a prophetic action. It's like, you know, Elijah in the Old Testament. You do actions which speak louder than any words. Idolatry is a horrible sin. It's a violation of the first commandment. It is not a joke. Idolatry is not a cultural artifact. It is an anti-cultural imposition, and, you know, the tradition of the church is idolatry is devil worship. We should have nothing to do with idols. Idols should not be present, and encouraging or letting people, you know, prostrate themselves in front of an idol in the Vatican Gardens. This is unbelievable.
Bob, the
and
Pope,
I know this was said by many people, but this has to end. This should never occur again.
Bob, the Pope apologized for this. He said there was no intention to worship idols or venerate these idols, and as Bishop of Rome, he apologized to those who were offended.
Yeah, but in point of fact, there were prayers said to this image. And Father is exactly right. Whether there was an intention that there be idolatry or not, there was functional. There was a functional type of idolatry, I think we have to say. Look, Pachamama is not a goddess. So what is she? There was no one who was willing to say at the synod, why is this image there? Yeah. Why are people bowing down to it? Every time that those of us in the press would try to press somebody about what is this, they would tell us that there are all sorts of symbolic ways of representing this and that in different cultures of the world.
It's an earth mother, it's fertility, it represents fertility, but it's an entity that is worshipped.
But the long and the short of this is, for many people, it seemed to attract the type of activity, the type of obeisance that you pay toward a god or a goddess. And so there's just simply no way to say either that this was trivial. If it was trivial, then of course why are people bowing down to it? If it's not trivial, of course, then that's a very serious thing that it appeared on Vatican territory.
I have 2 minutes left. I'm going to give each of you a minute to give me your prognostications, your predictions about 2020. Father Jerry, I'll start with you.
My prognostication is, you know, the faith will continue to be strong among those, among the laity and the clergy who, you know, profess the faith that we were taught as children and love and you know, cherish. On the other hand, the faith is also under attack sad to say, by some leaders. We have the German bishops as a body, not all of them, but as a body, they're convoking a meeting, they're calling it the Synodal Way, and they are going to ask for things like the ordination of women, which is completely impossible and antithetical to the Catholic doctrine of the priesthood. We also are going to see a major effort by people in the church who think that homosexual activity is not sinful. They are going to try to convince us that that point of view is compatible with Catholic doctrine. This is a horrendous thing for them to do. It is offensive to the faith that they profess. You cannot say that homosexual activity is moral. If you do that, you're denying the truth of the Catholic faith. Unfortunately, this is coming down the pipe. We are seeing all kinds of efforts in this regard. I'm looking basically at two things: a faithful and inspired group, and then another group is trying to undermine the faith.
Robert Royal, your predictions.
Well, what we can already see is that the Holy Father has decided to bring together different groups of people. There will be in March a meeting about a kind of a global humanism, which is very bizarre. It sort of plays into this interreligious dialogue that he's been pushing with Muslims and with others. And it is very strange because very early on in his papacy, he told people that they ought to read Robert Hugh Benson's book, Lord of the World, which precisely warns against this sort of secular savior type figure who's going to reconcile everyone about things that cannot be reconciled. People have different views of what human beings are, and so this idea of humanism, I don't think, is going to go very far. There are also plans about ramping up a different view of economics, which is going to play into the global economy, global ecology type of thing that we've seen in the past. So I predict that we're going to see more of this sort of universalism coming out of the Vatican. And as we've seen politically around the world, in the UK and Brexit, here in the United States, places on the European continent, there's going to be a pushback, I believe, a Catholic pushback against what seems to me to be a very cavalier attitude about Catholic theology and Catholic practice.
Papal Posse, we will leave it there. Thank you both. Robert Royal, Father Jerry Murray, Merry Christmas to you both. We will see you in the new year, and you can read all of Robert Royal and Father Jerry's commentary at TheCatholicThing.org. Thanks again. Christmas is right around the corner, and there are more options for viewing holiday entertainment than ever before. Is there anything worth watching, especially programs that you can still share with the whole family? Joining me now with a few suggestions is President of Aim Higher Entertainment, Monica FITZGIBBONS. Monica, thanks for being here. As I mentioned, with the streaming services and broadcast offerings this Christmas, there are so many things to binge watch or watch as a family. I asked our viewers what their favorite Christmas film was. Not surprisingly, It's a Wonderful Life was their favorite, followed by A Christmas Story. All right, what's your favorite? What would you recommend families watch this Christmas?
I mean, you can't go wrong with It's a Wonderful Life. The whole culture of it is enduring. Oddly enough, that was a film that really didn't do well when it first came out, and now it's the most beloved Christmas tradition. Can't go wrong.
Yeah, and I in our family, I love Scrooge. You know, the Albert Finney musical that you know, for the old English movie, hilarious and great. Recaptures, I think, the Christmas Carol for a new generation. It's hummable, and of course, Charlie Brown Christmas is a classic in our house as well. Now, you are president of Aim Higher Recordings, and you've produced two wonderful Christmas specials, both of which are airing this season on EWTN. Tell us about Christmas with the Dominican Sisters of Mary. What will audiences get there?
That also, you know, is one that just kind of came out of left field. It's a 30-minute special, and it's really coming into the Mother House in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with the sisters, seeing them ice skating, seeing their joy, partaking in a world that they really can't invite people into. So they were generous enough to allow us to create this special. And it's the sights, it's the music, it's very much a cozy family classic.
Now, you also did, I went to Boston to cover this story when you were recording the boys' choir of St. Paul's School. And you have Christmas in Harvard Square with the boys of St. Paul's Choir School in Boston. What will people find there? Such beautiful music. I mean, it's Latin classics.
Yes, exactly, Raymond. And, you know, as you know, this special also will be airing on EWTN. And it's the boys in their school, and it's very much a tradition that came from the Catholic Church and belongs to the Catholic Church and has gone around the world. And it's just nice to see it at its finest in Harvard Square, the famous Cambridge St. Paul's Church.
Yeah.
And the boys are all there in their school, and they come in and they sing, and it's beautiful.
And their training is incredible. I mean, they spend every day working their voices, blending, and it's an incredible sound that they make. Now, you and I partnered on a project near and dear to my heart, Christmas time in New Orleans a few years ago. I hosted the special. It is a love letter to the town I love at Christmas, and it's a fusion of music, tradition, faith, and fun. It featured the NOLA Players, a jazz supergroup that you recorded at the Sanger Theater, putting their spin on Christmas classics. Here's a taste of Christmas time in New Orleans. We do Christmas in New Orleans like no place on earth. You can taste the season here, feel its rhythm, and experience its joy. The music, the food, the sights, the sounds of New Orleans are never better than at Christmas time.
New Orleans at Christmas time is friends and family, but there's another F, food. So that's another reason I keep coming back home.
I always talk about New Orleans being the only indigenous urban cuisine left, and a lot of it has to do with commonality of a religion that brought a lot of intermarriages, and so people would share the recipes and share traditions, and it culminates. And so the basis of this culture takes place around that family table.
No other city ever in the history of this world has 7 distinct nations coming together to create what we call the mixtures, the Creoles, the Creoles of New Orleans. Forget about it. There's nothing like it.
That's what makes the city so unique, is we have a blend of people and a blend of food.
There is a communal spirit of inclusion all over New Orleans. People are just friendly. While we were conducting our interviews, some yelled greetings from cars.
How y'all doing? Hello?
Others just rolled into frame and started a conversation. Others literally stopped the bus in the middle of the street to say hello.
Proud of you. Thank you.
Hang in there.
Visitors to the city often experience that same welcome.
You're one of the family. You're adopted.
The music is so catchy there, Monica. How did you decide on these arrangements, this approach to the music?
Well, you know, Raymond, you've drawn us all into New Orleans, and now we're all, you know, honorary New Orleanians. They should make you the mayor. But anyway, it really is a musical Christmas card to the city, but also it really is something that people have really enjoyed watching with their whole family. Something the whole family can agree upon that's new, and that's unusual, as you know.
Agree. No, well, you set out to make a classic album. We set out to create a classic special, and I think we did. Now, there's a new way for folks to catch Christmas time in New Orleans this season. A brand new expanded cut is available. It's never been available before on broadcast. It's now at foxnation.com. You can sign up for a free trial, and you can watch it with your whole family. The code is CELEBRATE, and enjoy a little New Orleans Christmas wherever you are and wherever you are. Christmas time in New Orleans at foxnation.com. You can go there. Well, Merry Christmas, Monica, and thank you for joining us. And, of course, the soundtrack is available as well. Tell people where they can get it.
Merry Christmas. Well, you can get the soundtrack to that and the Sisters and the Boys Choir on DeMontfortmusic.com and, of course, EWTN and the Religious Catalog.
Monica,
and Merry Christmas to you, Raymond,
Merry
and
Christmas.
all your viewers.
We'll see you soon, and Happy New Year. Finally, he was the chaplain to Queen Elizabeth until 2017 when he resigned his commission for a very important reason. Eventually, he was drawn to Catholicism, and this weekend, he'll be received into the Catholic Church. Here to tell us exclusively about his journey and how he came to Catholicism is Gavin Ashenden via Skype from London. Gavin, thank you for being here. Now, you were ordained an Anglican priest in 1980 and rose to become a bishop. You served as a member of the General Synod of the Church in England for 20 years. In 2008, you were appointed an honorary chaplain to the Queen. Now, this Sunday, you'll be received into the Church. Was there one big thing that drove your conversion or compelled you to this decision to leave Anglicanism?
Well, there were a whole load of small but very significant things, and one final factor. The final factor is easy to describe, and it's simply my local Roman Catholic bishop saying, "Look, we know you're coming over sometime. Don't delay. Come now. We need you." And so, because there had been a large number of factors that had prepared me on a path of convergence to Catholicism, this was the final element that drew me across in response to his very kind request.
So it was that invitation. It was a personal invitation that sort of tipped the scale. Now, in 2017, you resigned from the papal household and relinquished your royal household, rather, not the papal one, the royal household, and you relinquished your chaplaincy after a passage from the Quran denying Christ's divinity was read at St. Mary's Cathedral in Glasgow. What was it about that moment that made you resign and relinquish your chaplaincy?
Well, there are two reasons. One is to do with content, and I think the other with process. The content was that it is an abominable, it's a blasphemy to have a piece of the Quran read out in Christian worship, in particular at the Feast of the Epiphany, which denies that Jesus is who he says he is. So that was a terrible thing to happen, and I was surprised that very few people seemed to mind very much or want to protest, as I did. But the way in which the Queen and the whole monarchy manages its position in England is to stay out of politics. And so because there was a perception that actually I was speaking on behalf of the Queen and she shared my views, if I was not to create some kind of constitutional crisis, I either needed to shut up or else I needed to resign. So I was very clear what choice I wanted to make. I wasn't prepared to be quiet on matters that had to do with our Lord's dignity and the integrity of the church. So I offered my resignation so that I could continue to speak out, to fight in these culture wars, because in the West, there's an enormous struggle to dilute Christianity, to defeat it and to silence it. And so it requires some of us to throw ourselves even more energetically into the defense of the faith. To do that, I had to resign from the royal household.
In a forthcoming edition of the Catholic Herald, you write the following about the Anglican Church. You say, "I've watched as Anglicanism suffered a collapse of inner integrity as it swallowed wholesale secular society's descent into a post-Christian culture." Tell me, were there other factors that drove you from Anglicanism? I mean, it seems you engaged the fight and you were trying to pull the faith back from the brink.
Yes, I have been for some time. I spent 25 years as a professor at a radical university, lecturing in the psychology of religion. So I had a very good sense of what was coming to our culture and what the struggle was going to be like. And one of the things that I realized was this wasn't just a matter of progressive culture or a slow rise in secularism, but actually there was a really very coherent anti-Christian program that a number of people have called cultural Marxism. It's the kind of, most people understand it in terms of political correctness, but behind political correctness, there is in fact a grand strategy, and it's a rather dangerous one, and it's the attempt to undo the whole of Judeo-Christian culture, all the values that spring out of the Bible and our Christian tradition. And having got a sense of what that strategy was, I watched slowly as it came through society, through all the institutions, through education, through law, through the police, and the church should have said, we see what's going on, we're going to resist it. But instead, the Anglican Church in particular just swallowed it wholesale. And after a while, it seemed to me that there was almost no hope at all in getting people to wake up. They would rather be accepted and part of an apostate society than they would be marginalized in order to stand up for Jesus and the faith.
Gavin, I've only got 2 minutes. I wish I had 2 hours. You're going to have to come back on the show. Is there any concern you have? Because as I hear you speak, I'm thinking Catholicism is grappling with some of these very waves and currents that you describe in Anglicanism.
Yes, of course.
So what would be your answer to someone who would say, wait a minute, you might be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire?
Well, I am jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, and people have said, you know, the grass isn't going to be greener. There was a day when I got some emails from two groups of people. One was from some Anglicans, because I have a lot of people looking for my website. One was from Anglicans saying, thank you for speaking out. You make it easier for us to be Christians. The other was from a group of Roman Catholics who said the same thing. But they said, you do realize that as you fight this struggle in Anglicanism is going to go down. It won't survive. But the Church of Rome, built upon Peter, it will survive. So why don't you come and help us? Because it's the same struggle, and you'll win it in Roman Catholicism, but you'll lose it in Anglicanism. And that struck me almost as a word from the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
And I thought, that's true. I need to give that some more thought.
What does it mean to you coming into Catholicism, the year of St. John Henry Newman's canonization, a man whom I know had a huge influence on this decision and your decision to convert to Catholicism?
Well, it's embarrassing because I identify with him very strongly, whereas he was a giant and I'm a pygmy. But our journeys have been really very similar in terms of the narrative. And so for me, he's always been, for 30 years, he's charted the journey. And I think right back 30 years ago, I knew I'd have to take this journey sometime. I'm very grateful to him for making clear to me and to others what the issues are, and for trailblazing a route back to Rome, where we belong, the one true church, where the fullness of faith is celebrated and the power of Christ is truly revealed.
Gavin Ashenden, thank you for your articulate defense of the faith and your intelligence. It is needed, as those email correspondents said to you. And welcome home. On December 22nd, you'll be coming into the church. And what a great Christmas gift, not only for you, but for all of us. Merry Christmas.
Especially for me. Thank you very much. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. It's a world over Christmas for 2019 with all your favorites and some extras. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. Merry Christmas. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.